under the dim glow of crimson lamps set deep beneath the restless tides of Aquaron 7. A lone figure moved carefully along the metallic corridors that separated oxygen-rich living modules from the world of brine outside. Engineer Ethan Keene, a quiet man from Earth's remote colony on Titan, carried in his hands a delicate device that whirred softly with repressed power. The interior walls shimmered with condensation, droplets running into the grated floors. Each step echoed with a faint clang, and the entire passageway seemed to pulse with distant mechanical rhythms, as though the station itself were alive, breathing in watery sync with the planet's ceaseless currents. Ethan had been on this assignment for only 3 weeks, yet the cramped space and the aquatic domain beyond felt strangely welcoming. His purpose here was critical. The underwater reactor that provided both thermal regulation and energy to the Nalphi research station had shown signs of failure. If it truly broke down, the carefully tended ecosystem that these aquatic scientists had cultivated might collapse. The Nalphi, whose amphibious physiology allowed them to swim with effortless grace in the watery realms, had invested decades of research into preserving the fragile marine species of Aquaron 7. Ethan was tasked with preventing any meltdown that might poison the environment. Each time he glanced at the pressure gauges or heard the hiss of steam escaping a faulty pipe, he sensed the precariousness of this station's place in the depths. He approached a sealed hatch, the words "Coolant Control Authorized Personnel" only stamped boldly across it, and keyed in his clearance code. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small chamber lined with panels that blinked in alarm. Within the far corner, cables thrummed ominously, swathed in foam like insulation that glistened in the watery light. As Ethan stepped inside, his breath caught in the chill air. Temperature fluctuations in this section were even worse than the rest of the station. Frozen condensation clung to the walls in delicate patterns, fractal shapes reminiscent of undersea corals. Slowly, he unclasped the device in his arms, a portable resonator intended to stabilize coolant flow. Even in Earth-based engineering circles, it was considered experimental, a prototype that seldom left secure labs. But in the face of looming disaster, risk took second place to urgency. He knelt before the coolant relay's control panel, wiping away the frost that clung to the metal. His gloved hands moved with a careful precision, connecting wires, recalibrating circuits. Each movement, each cautious nudge, threatened to trigger a chain reaction if done incorrectly. Yet Ethan's posture revealed confidence. He had spent a lifetime studying arcane power systems, an odd passion that had led him far from Earth's well-trodden paths. A faint beep signaled that the resonator had begun its work. The screens overhead shifted from alarming red to a calmer green, and the hum in the cables lowered to a steady thrum. Though the chill remained, at least the immediate crisis seemed averted. With a measured sigh of relief, Ethan prepared to leave and recheck the overall system in the main control room. He still had to cross several passages, each sealed off from the ocean by layers of reinforced plating. As he stepped into the corridor, however, he froze. An unusual silhouette swam by beyond the transparent porthole that separated him from the watery expanse. At first, it seemed a mere shadow, some typical creature that roamed these waters, but then it lingered. A luminous flicker from overhead lights revealed delicate webbed hands, a slender body clad in a streamlined protective suit, and eyes that gleamed with an ethereal sheen. Suddenly, the figure turned, revealing a face that was both alien and familiar. Two wide-set eyes, tinted a soft turquoise, gazed back at him curiously. He recognized it as a Nalphi researcher. Though the Nalphi walked these corridors in a regulated environment, they truly flourished in the depths outside. Their scientific community had spent years perfecting the station's design to permit partial flooding where needed. Many had the advantage of moving gracefully between air and water, yet this individual seemed different, standing out even among her own kind. If the rumors Ethan had overheard were accurate, some claimed she was a genius. Others believed she was touched by deeper mysteries of the ocean. The station staff simply referred to her as Rena. They regarded one another across that pane of glass, the swirl of oceanic brine between them. For a moment, time seemed suspended, the station's mechanical hum droning like a hushed heartbeat. Then, as though drawn by an invisible thread, Rena raised her webbed hand in greeting. Ethan felt a jolt in his chest, an unexpected warmth that flowed from the simplest of gestures. He nodded, unsure if she could truly see such a small motion. Yet, in response, her lips curled into something akin to a smile. She drifted away, disappearing into the gloom beyond the faint light from the corridor. The rhythmic pulse of the ocean resumed its indifferent cadence, and Ethan found himself unexpectedly stirred. There was a beauty to this world, hidden beneath the waves, a serenity that defied the mechanical hustle of daily life. In that fleeting encounter, he sensed something that transcended the typical boundaries between species, a quiet acknowledgement, perhaps a curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of compassion. Shaking off the reverie, he continued on, scanning the station's readouts on his wrist console. Ahead lay a labyrinth of corridors leading to the central control dome. The swirl of industrial scents, metal, lubricants. Faint ozone lingered in the air, but the memory of Rena's eyes followed him like a soft glow in the darkness. Duty called, and he had a precarious reactor to stabilize. Yet that fleeting moment lingered, casting a bright note of promise in Aquarian 77's silent depths. By the time Ethan arrived at the central control dome, the hum of machinery had subsided to a steady bass vibration that rumbled through the station's skeletal supports. The dome itself was a grand, circular chamber, surrounded by thick panels of reinforced glass that offered a panoramic view of Aquarian 77's murky depths. Through those curved windows, shifting schools of fish-like creatures passed by, luminescent patterns flickering across their scales. Some of the more curious species drifted close, drawn by the faint glow of the interior lights, only to vanish in silvery bursts when their instincts flared caution. A cluster of Nalphi technicians stood around a wide console at the chamber's center, their slender frames clothed in synthetic suits that matched the pale turquoise of their skin. At the slightest noise, they turned, revealing the delicate webbing between their fingers and the subtle ridges near their gills, which fluttered when they inhaled. They welcomed Ethan with polite nods, though their eyes flickered anxiously across the readouts they had been monitoring. "Status?" Ethan asked in a low voice, mindful of the tension in the air. He had found that a calm demeanor went far in these high-pressure situations, where the entire station's fate hung in the balance. An older Nalphi, with streaks of silver across his brow, gestured to a series of graphs on the console screen. "Thermal fluctuations are still erratic," he said, his voice accompanied by soft whistles inherent to Nalphi speech. "Your repairs to the coolant relay have stabilized that section, but we're seeing new anomalies near the southern sector, where the main laboratory is located. There might be a partial rupture in the secondary intake line." Ethan frowned, leaning closer to the console. On the screen, a digital schematic of the station glowed with pulsing lines of color. He spotted the affected area, ringed in warning orange, just a short distance from the labs that housed the Nalphi's prized aquatic specimens. If that line were, indeed, compromised, both the experiment tanks and the station's power grid could be at risk. Vital resources might be lost to the sea. Without hesitation, he asked, "Has anyone gone down there to assess the damage?" A younger Nalphi scientist shook his head. "Not yet. We've been short-staffed in the engineering department, and we lack suits that can withstand the increased pressure at that level," he admitted. Ethan allowed himself a small breath. "I'll go," he said. "Show me on the map precisely where the leak might be. I'll need a pressurized suit, and I'll want a Nalphi who knows the lab's layout. The last thing I want is to tamper with something critical for your experiments." A moment of hesitation passed through the group. Finally, a gentle voice spoke up from a nearby vantage point. "I'll accompany you," it said. Ethan turned to find Rena, stepping lightly across the threshold. In the brighter lighting of the dome, her features were more apparent, the faint shimmer of her turquoise skin, the intelligent calm in her wide-set eyes, the confident yet measured way she carried herself. There was a grace in her movements, reminiscent of drifting seaweed dancing on a gentle current. A murmur passed through the technicians, and the older Nalphi, who had first spoken, cast a worried glance in Rena's direction. "Are you sure?" he asked, concern evident in his tone. "You know we must preserve your talents for the genetic research. If there's a rupture, the risk." Rena offered a reassuring smile, though there was a hint of steel beneath her gentle demeanor. "Your concerns are valid," she said, "but the labs are also vital to my work. The experimental subjects within those tanks are the culmination of years of research to preserve endangered species. I cannot stand idle while the station is threatened." Then she inclined her head toward Ethan. "Besides, if we rely upon a human to assess the damage, should we not offer him the best guidance we can? I know the layout intimately." The older Nalphi relented with a sigh. "Very well," he said, his voice tinged with resignation. "Proceed with caution. We'll be monitoring from here." Rena nodded. Without further ado, she guided Ethan to a side chamber where their diving equipment was stored. The smooth, polished floors reflected the subdued overhead lights, casting ghost-like shapes across the metal. A row of sleek suits hung along one wall, some designed for Nalphi physiology, others adapted from human technology. She paused in front of a suit that combined elements of both designs, a custom piece evidently made for collaborative missions. "I was part of the team that helped integrate Nalphi Hydro weave with Earth-based exosuit materials," Rena explained, running her slender fingers across the seams. "We discovered that certain Nalphi textiles can expand and contract based on external pressure, thus providing a more resilient shield against oceanic currents." Ethan touched the suit with admiration. "Impressive," he murmured, marveling at the subtle patterns across its surface. "It's an elegant solution, better than many Earth models." A glimmer of appreciation shone in Rena's eyes. "Your people provided the synthetic alloys," she said, "which have excellent thermal regulation properties. My team merely studied ways to fuse them with organic Nalphi membranes. The result is synergy." He caught himself staring at her, entranced by both her words and her presence. It was as though the watery hush of the planet had seeped into her very being, giving her a calm, steady radiance. "I'm grateful for the chance to see the brilliance behind this research," he offered, pulling his gaze away to inspect the suit's clasps. "Let's hope it does the job." Together, they prepared for the descent. He donned the hybrid suit, feeling the snug but flexible material conform to his limbs. Rena chose a more lightly armored version that allowed for agile movement, the bright runic patterns woven into the fabric glowing faintly. Two Nalphi assistants helped them check the oxygen mixture and sensor readings, ensuring everything was in order. Then, with final nods of encouragement, they stepped into the pressurization chamber. A shuddering hiss enveloped them as the chamber cycled, water rushing in to fill the space around their legs. Ethan's heart thumped with anticipation, each droplet on his skin reminding him that beyond this room lay an alien realm where the slightest miscalculation could prove deadly. Through the curved glass of the inner door, he saw the ocean, dark and vast, beckoning them into its mysterious depths. Moments later, the interior door slid open, allowing water to surge in fully. The suits adapted swiftly, and soon, Rena propelled herself forward with effortless grace. Ethan moved more cautiously, his mind reminding him of the training he had received for underwater missions. But no simulation could quite replicate the reality of descending into an alien sea. They passed beneath the station's illuminated underbelly, the shining structure fading into the surrounding gloom. Schools of bioluminescent creatures drifted by, painting the water with soft, shimmering light. Tiny orbs that resembled living lanterns glowed gently, casting an otherworldly atmosphere. The weight of the water pressed against Ethan, but the suit seemed to breathe with him, adjusting to keep him comfortable. As they ventured deeper, Rena pointed out lines of thick conduit that stretched from the station's base, bringing in water necessary for cooling and experimental procedures. The Nalphi had positioned them with precision along rock formations to minimize disturbance to local wildlife. Now, however, those conduits might be compromised. Ethan could see faint jets of bubbles escaping from somewhere up ahead, a sure sign of a rupture. They approached the damaged section carefully. The conduit's surface glowed with emergency beacons that flickered erratically. A hairline crack ran along its side, leaking water into the pipeline where there should have been a controlled flow. Rena inspected the breach with expert eyes, while Ethan maneuvered to a small control box that jutted from the station's exterior. "Regulators are failing," Rena said through the suit's communicator, her voice tinged with worry. "If the crack widens, it could draw water into the labs unexpectedly, compromising the tanks within." Ethan nodded, scanning the readings on the control box. The station's sensors had flagged the anomaly, but the automated system seemed unable to seal the breach on their own. "We'll need to apply a specialized patch," he said, "and reroute the coolant flow until the main line can be repaired or replaced. I have some sealant in my toolkit." Yet even as they readied their equipment, a sudden vibration tremored through the conduit, shaking loose fragments of rock from the seafloor. A surge of water rushed against them, and Ethan braced himself. "What was that?" he asked, voice muffled by static. Rena's eyes widened, her posture tensing. "A pressure shift," she replied. "It must be related to the reactor's overall imbalance. We have to act quickly before it happens again." With careful teamwork, they applied a flexible metallic patch over the crack, the Nalphi hydro weave fusing with the Earth-supplied alloy. Rena calibrated the conduit's flow, while Ethan manipulated the external control box to redirect pressure away from the damaged area. Minutes felt like hours, their hearts pounding in tandem, the water swirling with debris. Finally, as Ethan locked the last latch in place, the torrent of leaking water subsided to a faint trickle. "That should hold," he said, relief evident in his voice. "At least long enough for a permanent fix." Rena exhaled softly, her face illuminated by the faint glow of her suit's patterns. "We must make sure the lab and all its specimens remain safe," she insisted. "Let's go inside, verify everything from within, and perform a final systems check." With that, they turned back toward the station, their forms silhouetted against the shifting undersea lights. The hush of the ocean gave way to the pounding of Ethan's pulse in his ears, and as they swam side by side, he felt a small ember of warmth, an unspoken connection that spanned the gulf between species, forged in the crucible of shared peril. Part 3. Once they re-entered the station through a submerged hatch, Ethan and Rena found themselves in a narrow corridor that was partly flooded, a temporary measure enforced by automatic systems to protect sensitive lab components from sudden pressure changes. The water reached waist-high on Ethan, though it barely rose above Rena's hips. Given her slightly different proportions and ease in aquatic environments, overhead lights flickered, casting wavering reflections on the ceiling that reminded him of a nighttime ocean's surface. Their progress was cautious. Each step sent ripples coursing through the water, revealing submerged consoles and instrument panels that had been carefully sealed against leaks. Rena pointed to a sign on the wall in Nalphi script that indicated the main laboratory was just ahead. "It seems the flooding here is controlled," she observed, placing a webbed hand on a sensor pad to open a sealed door. "But we need to make sure it doesn't escalate." The door hissed open, draining a portion of the water into the adjoining passage. Beyond lay a space that was both a marvel of technology and a tribute to organic wonder. Rows of transparent tanks lined the walls, each containing a unique species of aquatic life. Some were luminous eels, their bodies pulsing with soft blues and greens, while others were delicate frond-like creatures that fluttered like living ribbons. Overhead, rotating lamps mimicked a gentle day-night cycle, ensuring the specimens maintained a semblance of their natural rhythms. Rena guided Ethan between the tanks, her voice hushed with admiration. "These creatures have lived on Aquarion 7 for centuries," she whispered, pressing her palm lightly against the glass of one tank. A small, finned being, adorned with colorful patterns reminiscent of a reef, swam close to her hand, as if seeking her attention. Their biology is fascinating. Some have bioluminescent patterns that shift in response to changing water chemistry, which we've adapted to help monitor the station's environment. Others secrete compounds that may hold cures for diseases we haven't even encountered yet. Ethan gazed at the swirling shapes in wonder, feeling a pang of responsibility. If the station's reactor failed, or if there was another rupture in the conduits, all these delicate lives could be lost. The very thought sent a spike of resolve through him. "Then we'll make sure nothing happens to them," he said softly, casting a glance at Rena. She regarded him in return, her expression brightening. "Thank you," she replied, sincerity woven through her tone. "I know that we are but temporary stewards here, entrusted with safeguarding these creatures. Their existence predates any Nalphi settlement. Our mission is to preserve them for future generations. Having your help," she paused, as though carefully choosing her words, "means more than you may realize." They reached a central console in the heart of the laboratory, a raised platform surrounded by control panels. A blue-green hologram hovered above it, depicting the station's immediate environs. Rena tapped a series of icons, bringing up a diagnostic display of the cooling systems. The conduits they had just patched showed a stable pressure reading. However, elsewhere, in the labyrinth of pipelines, multiple red indicators flashed. Ethan frowned, studying the readouts. "It looks like the strain on the reactor is triggering microfractures all across the system," he murmured, zooming in on several trouble spots. "We can patch them one at a time, but that won't solve the underlying problem. The reactor is old, the maintenance backlog is enormous, and the meltdown risk is real." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the gentle hum of the tanks behind them. Rena pressed her hand to her chin, webbed fingers smoothing across her skin. "We Nalphi have been hesitant to upgrade," she admitted, partly due to budget constraints, and partly out of a desire to avoid drawing attention from the Imperium. "Our planet might be subject to new regulations if external powers discover our advanced research. Still, we must do something." Ethan nodded. He had heard rumors of the Imperium, an interstellar authority that frequently imposed stringent policies on frontier worlds. The Nalphi wanted to protect their independence. Yet that secrecy came with a cost. "We might need to design a hybrid reactor combining human thermal regulation techniques with Nalphi fluidic engineering," he suggested, warming to the idea. "By distributing the stress load, we could reduce the risk of catastrophic failure. But implementing such a system might require wide-scale reconstruction." Rena's eyes lit up with curiosity. "A novel approach," she mused. "We've studied variations of that concept, but never fully pursued it. Perhaps your expertise can help us see it through." Though their conversation was charged with possibilities, a sudden alarm cut through the lab. Panels flashed red, and a strident tone echoed through the corridors, sending a jolt of adrenaline through Ethan. Rena rushed to the nearest console, scanning the scrolling text. "A coolant valve just blew in the western sector," she announced, pressing keys in quick succession. "Containment measures are in place, but the reading suggests a dangerous spike in temperature levels near the nursery tanks. If the heat there rises too high, it could sterilize the eggs we're incubating." Ethan nodded sharply. "Let's go," he said, already taking steps toward the exit. Rena followed, her movements swift measured. They left behind the softly glowing tanks, entering a corridor where klaxons and flashing emergency lights replaced the tranquil ambience. Other Nalphi workers hurried past, voices tense, eyes wide with concern. The reactor's ancient rumblings seemed to reverberate through every wall, a stark reminder of the precarious reality they faced. Guided by the station's signage, Ethan and Rena navigated multiple bulkheads, sealed doors, and half-flooded compartments. The emergency lights bathed everything in a throbbing red hue, making the station's typically cool metallic surfaces seem ominous. At last, they arrived at the western sector, where a haze of vapor-filled air signaled dangerously high temperatures. Heat poured through the vents, rolling across their faces in suffocating waves. Rena coughed, her gills fluttering as she tried to adapt to the shifting climate. Along one wall, a thick pipe was spewing steam, and rivulets of superheated water trickled down, hissing as they touched cooler surfaces. Beyond it lay the nursery section, rows of small spherical chambers where the Nalphi cultivated eggs of endangered species under precise conditions. Ethan slid into action, rummaging through his toolkit for a replacement valve. "We need to vent the excess heat somewhere safe," he said, gesturing for Rena to access the control panel overhead. She responded immediately, climbing a short ladder and typing in commands. The console crackled with electricity, sparks dancing across the touchscreen in protest of the station's faltering power distribution. Seconds stretched to what felt like hours as they worked together to detach the damaged valve, each twist of the wrench accompanied by a hiss of scalding steam. The floor beneath them became slick, and the air grew thick. Sweat beaded on Ethan's forehead, and he could only imagine how uncomfortable it must have been for Rena, whose physiology was suited to cooler, more aquatic conditions. With a final snap, they removed the faulty valve, steam pouring out in an angry torrent. "Now!" Ethan shouted, handing Rena the replacement. She slid it into place, her eyes narrowed in concentration, and sealed the fixture with an adhesive clamp. At once, the raging flow of steam diminished to a manageable trickle. The temperature gauge on Ethan's wrist console dropped several degrees. "That should prevent further damage," he breathed, lowering his wrench. "But we might have to double-check the nursery tanks. Let's hope we haven't lost anything precious." Rena nodded, a note of worry in her voice. "Every egg is vital. We don't have the luxury of losing a single life form." They hurried into the adjacent room, where rows of incubators hummed under a protective canopy of translucent membranes. The air was still warm, but no longer scalding. Rena ran a diagnostic on the nearest incubator, holding her breath as the readouts blinked with uncertain results. Then the console turned green, showing stable conditions. A collective sigh of relief escaped them as they checked the others. The tension eased, replaced by a renewed sense of determination. Their swift repair had likely saved these unborn creatures. Rena's gaze flicked to Ethan, and a tender gratitude shone in her expression. "You humans have a remarkable resilience," she said softly. "Many Nalphi would have struggled to withstand these temperatures, and we might not have been fast enough on our own." Ethan offered a modest shrug. "I'm just glad I could help," he replied, wiping away the sweat that still clung to his brow. He wanted to say more, perhaps something about how working beside her filled him with purpose, but the words lodged in his throat. Instead, he simply nodded, allowing an unspoken understanding to pass between them. They lingered a moment, watching the eggs floating in their fluidic chambers, each one a fragile promise of life yet to flourish. In that hush, the overhead klaxons fell silent. The crisis had passed, at least for the moment. The water that had once been calm had become tumultuous. But now gentle ripples replaced the waves of panic. The path ahead remained uncertain, riddled with potential hazards. The reactor was still old, the station's systems prone to failure, and the deeper secrets of the ocean lurked around every corner. Yet, as Ethan and Rena stood side by side, a quiet partnership formed, like a single bright current threading through the dark seas of Aquaron 7. In the days that followed, the station settled into a cautious rhythm of vigilance. Patrols were doubled, and diagnostic scans were run around the clock. Though small malfunctions continued to pop up, nothing escalated to the level of a full-scale emergency. Each success fueled a fragile hope that Aquaron 77's underwater research facility might endure. During that time, Ethan found himself increasingly in Rena's company. They compared notes on the reactor's design, spending late hours poring over schematics and research logs. Often, they convened at a small observation deck near the station's upper levels, where large windows gazed out into the endless blue. Bioluminescent creatures would drift by, their light dancing across the walls in faint, colorful patterns. In those quiet hours, the hum of machinery softened, replaced by the gentle resonance of the sea. Their conversations wandered beyond engineering topics, Rena confided her dreams of one day restoring entire reef networks on her homeworld. Using the knowledge gleaned from Aquaron 7's diverse ecosystem, Ethan, in turn, described Earth's battered oceans and how decades of neglect had forced humanity to search the stars for new frontiers. They spoke of hope and regret, the tenuous links that bound their peoples, and the potential for unity in shared discovery. "Tell me," Rena asked one evening, her gaze lingering on the drifting silhouettes of aquatic life outside. "How does Earth's ocean feel, now that you've lived beneath ours?" Ethan paused, reflecting. "Different," he admitted. "Our seas are vibrant in many places, still teeming with life, but we also carry scars: pollution, overfishing, climate shifts. Earth's oceans are a testament to both our creativity and our carelessness." He turned to meet her eyes. "Being here, witnessing your dedication, I can't help feeling both admiration and a twinge of sorrow." Rena nodded, the thoughtful flicker in her gaze revealing empathy. "You are not alone in that sorrow," she murmured. "We Nalphi also bear the weight of past mistakes. Our technology advanced so quickly that some of our oldest marine habitats suffered damage before we knew how to protect them. That's one reason we settled on Aquaron 7, to learn and to atone." In the gentle glow of the observation deck, their shared reflection formed a moment of profound connection. The station's quiet hum seemed to fade into the background. Outside, countless life forms carried on in the dark waters, unaware that their guardians grappled with heavy truths. The next day, Ethan woke early with a renewed sense of purpose. He had resolved to attempt a fundamental recalibration of the reactor's core, something he had been pondering for days. If done successfully, it could enhance energy output while reducing the strain on the aging systems. If botched, however, it might spark a chain reaction that would be catastrophic. He needed Rena's input, along with any specialized Nalphi instruments. They convened in a small laboratory that Rena used for her genetic studies, an odd but private space for their engineering collaboration. Samples of marine tissue and advanced scanning devices lined the counters, overshadowed by the mechanical prototypes Ethan had hauled in. The hum of climate-controlled containers formed a subtle backdrop as they worked side by side. "I've been studying the reactor's original blueprints," Ethan said, spreading out several holographic diagrams over a table. "It's a second-generation fusion module, modified with Nalphi water cooling enhancements. My plan is to augment the central coil with additional heat sinks, derived from your hydroweave technology. That might stabilize the core's temperature fluctuations." Rena tilted her head, her webbed fingers tracing the lines on the diagram. "Our hydroweave could handle that. But what about structural integrity? Installing new sinks inside the core might require reinforcing the reactor's outer shell." He tapped another portion of the blueprint. "Precisely. We'd integrate cross braces, using a carbon-infused alloy from Earth. Even if the core overheats, the structural bracing would prevent catastrophic collapse." She considered his words. "It's a massive undertaking," she breathed, "but it could buy us the time we need. If the reactor can hold steady for a few more years, we'd be able to design and implement a full upgrade." They spent hours modeling scenarios on a joint simulation console, inputting data from the station's logs, calculating potential pitfalls. Through trial and error, they refined the design until it stood as a cohesive plan, risky, but brimming with promise. Their eyes gleamed with excitement, like children on the cusp of a grand discovery. Before they could finalize their preparations, however, an abrupt tremor rocked the station. The equipment rattled, and a sealed container on a nearby shelf slid off, shattering on the floor. Alarms flared once more, but this time the wail had a sharper, more urgent undertone. Rena paled. "That's the reactor alarm," she said. "Something's happening in the core itself." They rushed into the corridor, where Nalphi technicians hurried back and forth, their voices raised in alarm. The station's lighting flickered. Overhead announcements blared in multiple languages, instructing personnel to secure their stations and brace for potential evacuations if containment was lost. Pushing through the chaos, Ethan and Rena made their way to the reactor chamber's main entrance. It was guarded by two Nalphi security staff, who reluctantly stepped aside upon seeing the urgency in Rena's eyes. Inside, the reactor room glowed with an eerie crimson light. Towering machinery encased the central core, where arcs of energy danced erratically. The normally steady hum had ascended into a distressed roar, with sparks flying from overloaded conduits. An older human engineer, Diaz, was there, frantically typing into a control panel while sweat beaded on his brow. He glanced up as they arrived. "The containment field is destabilizing," he barked over the noise. "Some kind of pulse from the core is overloading the entire system." Ethan hurried to another console, scanning the readouts. "The meltdown sequence is creeping into stage 1, he shouted, struggling to keep his voice steady. "If we don't restabilize, we'll see a breach in less than an hour. That could vent radioactive plasma into the ocean, wiping out everything in a massive radius." Rena's gaze darted around the room. "We have to implement our plan for reinforcing the core," she urged, stepping up to a control station. "We need to divert power, deploy coolant rods, anything to buy us more time to install those additional supports." Diaz grimaced. "That's a tall order. We might have only minutes before the next pulse. But if we don't do something drastic, we're doomed anyway." Drawing in a steadying breath, Ethan started inputting commands, disabling non-critical systems to free up energy for the cooling protocols. Rena, meanwhile, interfaced with the Nalphi subroutines, commanding rows of mechanical arms to position themselves around the core. Steam hissed, valves whined, and the room's temperature soared. The air reeked of burning metal and ozone. An engineer's job often meant facing the unknown with nothing but skill and hope. Now, as the station teetered on the brink, Ethan felt that burden acutely. His heart pounded. Each second, a precious gift. Preparing structural reinforcement, he called out, connecting the earth-carbon alloy braces to the robotic assembly. "Rena, I'll need you to align them precisely with the hydro weave and anchor them in place as soon as the rods deploy." Her response crackled through the intercom. "Understood. Awaiting your signal." Time blurred. A deep rumble shook the floor. The main console flashed an ominous warning. "Overload in 420 seconds. Diaz cursed under his breath and rushed to reset an overloaded breaker. Sparks rained down from above. Then, in a coordinated flurry of activity, Ethan and Rena commenced the upgrade. The automated arms, guided by Rena's programming, thrust new bracing segments around the core. Hydro weave layers unraveled from spools, bonding themselves to the reactor's superstructure. Ethan sweated through every motion, checking stress readings, adjusting torque levels. One miscalculation could trigger a catastrophic failure. At 120 seconds to meltdown, a shuddering groan echoed through the chamber. Ethan glanced at the readouts, alarmed. The external pressure was climbing, the ocean itself pressing in, as if sensing weakness. "We have to finalize this now," he shouted. "Installing final brace," Rena confirmed, her voice tight with urgency. She keyed in the last set of coordinates, and the assembly hissed as the final piece locked into place. The control panel beeped with new data, streaming lines of code that would either signal success or confirm destruction. Then, in a moment that seemed suspended in time, the reactor's deafening roar quieted, settling into a more measured thrum. Red warning lights flickered to yellow, and internal sensors reported a drop in core temperature. Diaz, panting in relief, whispered a string of expletives that turned into a half-laugh. The meltdown sequence halted at 27 seconds. Exhausted, Ethan sank against a railing, wiping sweat from his eyes. He looked at Rena across the swirling steam. Her face bore a sheen of perspiration, yet in her wide-set eyes, he saw relief and the flicker of triumph. Slowly, he offered a weary grin. "We did it," he managed to say, voice hoarse. "We did," she answered, a soft smile forming on her own lips. The station itself seemed to exhale, releasing a tension that had gripped every corridor. Diagnostics showed the new bracing and cooling enhancements were holding. Though more work remained to make the solution permanent, the immediate threat had passed. Diaz, regaining his composure, strode over and patted Ethan on the shoulder. "No small feat, my friend," he said, admiration shining through his gruff exterior. "You and Rena saved us all. I don't even want to imagine what would have happened otherwise." Ethan's gaze drifted to Rena. There was gratitude there, mingled with something deeper. In the swirling heat and acrid smoke of the reactor chamber, he recognized a bond that had taken hold, forged in perilous moments, nurtured by mutual respect. The meltdown had been averted, but the echo of shared fears and triumphs lingered, an unspoken connection bridging the gap between human and Nalphi. Outside, the ocean pressed against the station walls, indifferent yet strangely comforting. The darkness held within it wonders and dangers alike. Yet, for the moment, the battered metal halls of the facility felt like a home saved from ruin. And in Rena's bright eyes, Ethan saw not just relief for the present, but hope for a future built on unity and trust. In the aftermath of the reactor crisis, Aquarian 77's research station rumbled with renewed energy. Crews worked tirelessly to assess the newly reinforced core, patch the secondary fractures, and restore systems that had gone offline during the emergency. Word of the near catastrophe spread through the corridors, prompting nods of respect and words of gratitude whenever Ethan or Rena passed by. It was a stark reminder that, despite initial wariness between humans and Nalphi, shared adversity had a way of bridging cultural divides. Yet even as the immediate danger subsided, new challenges arose. The reactor was stable, but not invulnerable. The station's managers convened a summit to discuss the next steps, whether to petition the Imperium for permission to procure a modern reactor or to attempt a more ambitious, entirely homegrown upgrade. There was also the matter of financial resources, political implications, and the ever-looming question of whether secrecy was still viable. The Nalphi were proud and protective of their work, while the human contingent recognized the harsh realities of interstellar bureaucracy. Ethan found himself swept into these discussions, often at Rena's side. She introduced him to the station's leadership, a mix of Nalphi elders and a few human representatives who had long settled among them. The conference room was set deep within the facility, its large table framed by a domed viewport that revealed an enchanting vista of aquatic life floating beyond. The flickering lights of underwater creatures provided a surreal contrast to the heated debates taking place inside. "May I remind everyone," an elder Nalphi, tall and stately with silver lines marking his temples, said pointedly, "that the Imperium's involvement could compromise our autonomy. They might declare Aquarian 7 a protected biosphere, imposing strict protocols that would hamper our research." A human woman in a navy blue jumpsuit countered, "But if we don't upgrade soon, we might not have a station left to protect." The meltdown scare wasn't a one-off fluke. This place is on borrowed time without serious investment. Heads nodded around the table. Though tension crackled in the air, Rena stood to address them, speaking softly, yet with conviction. "We have proven that a hybrid approach, blending human alloys and Nalphi hydroweave, can reinforce the reactor. Why can't we build upon that success to design a completely new system here, without external interference?" Ethan weighed in, explaining how Earth's advanced reactor designs could serve as a blueprint, yet remain adapted for Nalphi needs. The synergy they had witnessed in recent days might only be the beginning. His words sparked cautious optimism. However, the cost in both time and resources was daunting. Fabrication lines would have to be repurposed, specialized tools imported or invented. Months, if not years, of research and construction lay ahead. After hours of back-and-forth dialogue, the meeting adjourned with no definitive conclusion. There was agreement, at least, that the station would not attempt a secret major overhaul without further study. A final decision was tabled for a subsequent gathering, leaving the station's future uncertain. Despite the tenuous atmosphere, Ethan and Rena continued working, forging a partnership that went beyond mere engineering tasks. They took frequent breaks in the observation deck, or strolled the labyrinthine corridors, talking about everything from personal histories to philosophical musings on life's fragility in a hostile universe. Their conversations flowed as smoothly as the ocean currents outside. One evening, Rena invited Ethan to a Nalphi ritual known as the wave song, a ceremonial sharing of stories performed in a partially flooded amphitheater. Curious, he accepted. The amphitheater was located near the station's lower levels, where the walls were translucent windows revealing the swirling waters just beyond. Soft, luminescent corals clung to the outside structure, their glow mirroring the shifting ambience within. Dozens of Nalphi had gathered, their melodic voices blending in an otherworldly chant that resonated through the water. A mesmerizing cadence filled the chamber, recounting ancestral legends of how the Nalphi first ventured from their homeworld to discover new oceans among the stars. Overhead, a subtle infusion of color lighting bathed the scene in gentle hues, transforming the amphitheater into a living tapestry of memory and hope. Rena guided Ethan to a spot near the edge, where the water rose to their ankles. She explained in hushed tones that each stanza of the song symbolized a phase of exploration, adaptation, and reverence for aquatic life. "This is how we preserve our heritage," she said, her gaze reflecting the shimmering lights. "It may seem strange to outsiders, but it unites us in spirit. Perhaps one day you'll share your own Earth songs with us, so we can honor your world as well." Ethan listened intently, captivated by the harmonies and the profound sense of unity they invoked. In that moment, he realized how deeply entwined the Nalphi were with their environment, how their very being was shaped by water and the life it sustained. That synergy was what drew him to Rena. She was the embodiment of her people's ideals, a blend of scientific mastery and spiritual reverence. And though he came from an entirely different lineage, he felt an inexplicable kinship in her presence. When the wave song concluded, a hush lingered in the amphitheater, the reverberations of the final note slowly fading into the water. Nalphi began to disperse, exchanging soft words of blessing or quiet reflection. As Rena and Ethan made their way back to the main corridors, she offered him a gentle smile. "Thank you for joining us," she said, a note of sincerity in her tone. "I know it can be overwhelming, but I wanted you to see the heart of our culture." Ethan nodded. "I'm honored. It's beautiful and humbling." They fell into a contemplative silence as they made their way through the softly lit corridors. When they reached a branching hallway, Rena hesitated. "Would you like to visit the external research dome?" she asked. "I have some tasks there, but it also offers one of the best views of the reef." The prospect of seeing more of Aquaron 77's wonders was enticing. He agreed, and together they navigated a lift that descended into a section built specifically for direct interaction with the ocean. This dome was crafted of reinforced glass, allowing an almost panoramic experience of the surrounding waters. Lights from within revealed coral towers teeming with life, slender fish darting amidst swaying fronds, and, deeper in the darkness, larger shadows hinting at undiscovered secrets. A row of research consoles lined the interior, scanning the external environment. Nalphi scientists in specialized suits were busy taking water samples, monitoring species migration, and cataloging new forms of marine flora. The hustle of scientific inquiry held a quiet urgency. Each discovery could hold the key to a medical breakthrough or design innovation. As Rena checked the readings on a console, Ethan wandered to the dome's edge, placing a hand on the glass. The ocean stretched beyond, vast and unknowable. He had never been so aware of the thin barrier separating him from an alien sea. It was both humbling and exhilarating, reminding him of humanity's small place in the cosmic tapestry. "Striking, isn't it?" Rena's voice came from behind, and he turned to see her approach. "No matter how long we study, there's always more to learn, more to marvel at." He nodded in agreement. "It's a reminder that we're just a small piece of something much greater." She stood beside him, and for a moment, neither spoke. The hush was comfortable, the lights within illuminating their faces against the darkness outside. Something unspoken passed between them, a sense of closeness born of danger shared and wonder discovered. Softly, she began to speak again. "You know, Ethan, We Nalphi have a saying, "The ocean holds all secrets, and in its embrace, all hearts can learn to beat as one." I've often pondered that, especially these past days, seeing how our lives have entwined. He felt his chest tighten, a blend of emotions stirring within. "I think I understand what it means," he whispered. "In these depths, the differences between us seem less important. It's as though we're discovering a truth beyond individual worlds." For a moment, he was tempted to reach for her hand, but hesitated, uncertain of Nalphi customs. Yet she sensed his intent. With the slightest motion, her webbed fingers gently brushed against his, a quiet acknowledgement that words could not fully convey. The dome lights reflected in her eyes, and her slight smile conveyed both vulnerability and trust. Before the moment could deepen, an alert chimed from the nearby console. The display flashed with a new reading, some disturbance in the outer reef. Quickly, Rena moved to investigate, scanning the data. She frowned. "Strange," she muttered. "There seems to be a significant shift in the water currents. It could be a natural phenomenon, but it's unusually strong for this region." Ethan joined her, checking the graphs. "Could it be a result of the reactor's recent instability?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. The possibility of further complications weighed heavily on them both. Rena shook her head. "Hard to say without more data. Let's alert the appropriate team. We might need to deploy drones to investigate." As they relayed the information, the sense of tranquility that had enveloped them faded into professional caution. The sea, with all its beauty, was also capable of sudden ferocity. Yet, even under the threat of a potential new crisis, the quiet bond they shared remained, a connection forged in shadows and light, in near disaster and the glimmers of hope that made survival worthwhile. They stood there, side by side, gazing at the flickering display of oceanic currents, aware that their story on Aquarion 7 had many chapters yet to unfold. In that uncertain hush, where the unknown pressed close around them, a silent vow took shape, to face whatever came, together. The following week was marked by a fresh wave of uncertainties, as if the ocean itself had sensed the station's newfound stability and responded with unpredictable currents. Nalphi drones glided through the waters, their sensors mapping strange eddies and surges that defied normal patterns. Preliminary theories ranged from deep-sea tectonic shifts to previously unknown aquatic phenomena spurred by the reactor's electromagnetic field. No single explanation satisfied everyone. Ethan and Rena delved into the data, poring over wave charts and salinity profiles. Late into the station's artificial night cycle, they would sit in her lab, illuminated by the gentle glow of suspended water tanks containing luminous algae samples. The faint green-blue radiance bathed them in an ethereal light, fitting for their discussion of the ocean's secrets. "The changes seem sporadic," Ethan observed, tapping his stylus on the tablet. "One minute the current is calm, and the next, there's a surge powerful enough to sweep large debris across the reefs. It's like a pulse." Rena brought up a subroutine that cross-referenced drone footage with reactor logs. Could it be an interaction between our power output and the ocean's natural electromagnetic fields? "We've ramped up the reactor since the retrofit, possibly affecting local water chemistry." Her words sparked a thought. "We should analyze the frequency of these pulses alongside the reactor's fluctuations," Ethan proposed. "If they match or correlate in any way, it might confirm the reactor as a partial cause." Setting to work, they initiated a new simulation. Data lines converged and diverged, forming intricate patterns on the screen. Hours slipped by, and a quiet tension hung between them, not born of discomfort, but of intense focus. The hum of the station, the gentle swirl of watery corridors, even the passing footsteps of tired technicians outside, everything faded to the background of problem-solving. Eventually, a series of matching peaks on the graph caught Rena's eye. "Look here," she said, pointing with a webbed finger. "There's a noticeable correlation every few hours, just after the reactor performs a thermal release." Ethan leaned closer, excitement stirring in him. "So the station's new cooling cycle might be creating micro-temperature gradients in the surrounding ocean, triggering instability in the currents. The effect was mild before, but the improvements made it stronger, ironically giving us more power while also disturbing the environment. They exchanged glances, realization dawning on them both. Their repairs had saved the station, but might be endangering the reef's equilibrium. A sense of responsibility weighed heavily upon their minds. If unaddressed, these currents could damage fragile ecosystems, stirring sediment, dislodging corals, and scattering marine life. "What do we do?" Rena asked quietly, eyes shining with concern. "We can't allow the station to harm the very environment we're here to protect," Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We'll need to modify the release process. Perhaps we can filter the thermal discharge through multiple smaller vents spaced around the station, rather than a single large outlet. Distribute the heat more evenly so it doesn't form a single thermal plume." "Yes, a diffusion network," Rena agreed. "We'll need special piping, and we'll have to reroute some of the station's infrastructure again." She paused, then nodded resolutely. "Let's propose this to the leadership first thing in the morning." They were about to pack up for the night when Rena's personal communicator beeped, displaying an urgent message. Her expression darkened. "Ethan, it's from the medical bay. They've encountered a sudden mass infection among the newly hatched specimens in the nursery tanks. The staff is requesting immediate assistance, especially from anyone with knowledge of cross-species biology." Without hesitating, they hurried to the nursery sector, weaving through corridors until they reached the specialized wing where infant marine creatures were nurtured. The moment they arrived, the sight before them was heartbreaking. Several transparent tanks held young aquatic beings, some barely the size of a finger, all showing signs of distress, fading coloration, labored swimming, and odd fungal spots along their fins. A Nalphi biologist named Saren briefed them in hushed tones. "It started with one brood, then spread to the others. We suspect a bacterial or fungal pathogen, but we've never seen this strain before. The station's water filters are struggling to keep up." Rena stepped forward, examining the nearest tank with expert care. Her sharp eyes traced the patterns of discoloration. "It might be a mutation triggered by the changing water chemistry," she mused. "But we need samples to confirm, and we must isolate the infected immediately." Ethan, though not a biologist, offered his assistance. He set about helping to transfer afflicted creatures to quarantine tanks equipped with advanced filtration. Each small creature shuddered in the process, and the staff worked with painstaking gentleness, mindful of the fragility of such life. Overseeing the procedure, Rena coordinated sedation levels and temperature controls, her voice calm, yet firm. When at last the infected brood was contained, Rena and Saren began analyzing cell samples in the lab. Ethan waited anxiously in the corridor, feeling helpless. The mechanical aspects of the station had become his domain, but now biology took center stage, with stakes just as high. His mind wandered to the close link between these delicate organisms and the station's fate. If the environment was compromised, it would reflect on all that lived here, from the smallest hatchling to the largest apex predator. Some time later, Rena emerged, fatigue clear in her features. "We've identified a rare fungal spore that usually remains dormant in cooler conditions," she explained, addressing Ethan. "The recent temperature fluctuations might have activated it, allowing it to multiply. We have a potential antifungal compound that could work, but we need to administer it carefully or risk harming the brood." Concern etched Ethan's brow. "Can I help?" She offered a faint, appreciative smile. "We'll need steady hands to calibrate the dosage and introduce it into the water supply. Saren can handle the biological aspect, but we'll need precise control over the water flow systems. That's where you come in." Together, they went to a console that managed nutrient distribution and chemical infusion. Acting on Rena's guidance, Ethan overrode the default settings to allow incremental dosing of the antifungal agent. The process was delicate, requiring fine-tuned adjustments to water pressure and distribution channels. All the while, Rena monitored the hatchlings, measuring their stress responses. The hours ticked by, each second feeling like an eternity. Then, at last, signs of improvement emerged. The fungal spots began to recede, and the young creature's movements grew steadier. A hushed cheer spread through the staff. Relief flooded Ethan, and he noticed Rena wiping a tear from her eye, whether from exhaustion or joy. He couldn't tell, but he suspected both. Sarentot, too, looked visibly moved. "They'll need close observation for the next few days," Rena said softly, placing a comforting hand on the side of the tank. The small forms within drifted, their breathing patterns stabilizing. But they stand a good chance now. A wave of gratitude swept through Ethan. Moments like these reminded him why he had chosen a life of exploration and service. There was something deeply fulfilling about protecting fragile lives, bridging the gap between species to preserve hope. The station had been spared a meltdown, but this was no less a triumph, a rescue of living, breathing miracles. As dawn approached, though the sun never truly rose beneath Aquaron 77's surface, Ethan and Rena emerged into a quieter corridor. The station's lighting system had shifted to mimic morning's soft glow, though the water outside remained an endless expanse of dim mystery. Ethan was bone-tired, yet his spirit felt oddly buoyant. Rena, too, bore the exhaustion in her posture, but her expression shone with a tender warmth. "Thank you," she said, her voice subdued. "I could never have managed the mechanical side alone. And Saren, our entire team can't thank you enough." He gave a gentle nod, his gaze drifting to the glass panels where alien fish glided past. "No thanks needed. We're in this together." Right. A heartbeat of silence passed. Then, without warning, Rena leaned in and pressed her forehead to his, a gesture of deep reverence in Nalphi culture. The tips of her fingers grazed his shoulders, and for an instant, the boundaries between them seemed to vanish, replaced by a quiet unity. Surprise flickered through Ethan, but he embraced it, closing his eyes to the hush of the corridor and the swirl of water beyond. When she pulled back, a subdued smile curved her lips. "Get some rest," she murmured, stepping away. "We'll have more challenges soon enough." Watching her go, Ethan felt a new sense of belonging, a confirmation of a bond that had grown from mutual admiration into something deeper. The station might still be fraught with perils, unpredictable currents, political wrangling, and a fragile reactor, but in that moment, the heavy weight of uncertainty felt lighter, buoyed by a hidden warmth that transcended fear. He walked back to his quarters, the corridor lights shifting overhead as the station cycled through its simulated daybreak. A swirl of emotions danced in his mind: pride, relief, weariness, and an undeniable pull toward Rena. He recalled the Nalphi proverb she had shared, "In the ocean's embrace, all hearts can learn to beat as one." Perhaps these words had never been more relevant. Unbeknownst to either of them, a shimmering silhouette passed outside a porthole window, drawn by the faint glow of the station. Life in Aquaron 77's depths continued its eternal dance, unaffected by the drama unfolding behind steel walls. But within those walls, a quiet revolution was taking place, a testament to the possibility that, amid the darkest depths, a shared light could shine with unexpected brilliance. Weeks passed, bringing both renewed stability and cautious optimism. The diffusion network Ethan and Rena had designed steadily dispersed the station's thermal output, mitigating the turbulent currents that once threatened the reefs. Fewer malfunctions plagued the reactor, and the nursery's inhabitants continued their slow but steady recovery. In the corridors, the sense of looming catastrophe lifted, replaced by determined progress. Negotiations over the station's future dragged on, but the consensus grew in favor of further collaboration rather than appealing to outside powers. Quietly, a plan took shape to develop a new, fully integrated reactor within the station, combining Earth alloys, Nalphi hydroweave, and the latest advances in aquatic engineering. It would be a project spanning years, perhaps decades, but it would belong to both species, a testament to trust and shared stewardship. Amid these developments, Life found a gentler rhythm. On a rare afternoon when schedules allowed, Rena brought Ethan to a remote corner of the station, a small chamber that housed an experimental garden of aquatic plants. Nutrient-rich water flowed through transparent channels, sustaining delicate fronds and blooms of vivid reds and purples. The subdued light overhead created rippling patterns of soft color that danced across the walls. "I visit here when I need to clear my thoughts," Rena explained, her voice echoing in the stillness. "The plants aren't just decorative. They filter toxins, purify water, and produce medicinal compounds. Each blossom, each swaying leaf, contributes to the station's well-being." Ethan walked beside her, marveling at the interplay of light and water. The subtle fragrance of brine and blossoms perfumed the air. In a quiet alcove, they sat on a bench designed to allow water to lap around their feet. Schools of tiny fish darted nearby, unafraid of their presence. "When I first arrived," Ethan said after a reflective pause, "I saw Aquaron 7 as just another job and assignment to fix a failing reactor. But now, it feels like home in a way I never expected." Rena's lips curved into a gentle smile. Home can be many places, if we open our hearts. They exchanged a lingering look. Gone was the awkward formality of new acquaintances. In its place was a deep familiarity, the ease of two souls who had faced storms side by side. Their hands, once strangers, found each other on the bench's edge, webbed fingers entwining with human ones in a union that, mere months ago, might have seemed unimaginable. "Ethan," Rena began, her voice tinged with hesitation. He gently squeezed her hand. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered, understanding her unspoken sentiment. The challenges they had overcome, the bonds of camaraderie that had transformed into something more, all led to this moment. In that still, watery haven. The station's mechanical hum sounded more like a soft lullaby. They drew closer, foreheads nearly touching, hearts beating in quiet unison. Time seemed to dissolve into the rhythmic flow of water, the hush of breath, and the unspoken promise that all journeys, no matter how daunting, could end in the simple miracle of connection. A few days later, a small ceremony took place in the central dome. Nalphi and human representatives gathered to honor those who had safeguarded the station through recent trials. In a gesture of unity, both species shared tokens of cultural significance: a woven Nalphi tapestry depicting ocean waves, and a handcrafted earth medallion engraved with a stylized sun. Applause and aquatic chimes filled the air as each contributor was recognized. At the ceremony's conclusion, Rena announced the inception of a new collaborative research project designed to stabilize underwater ecosystems across the galaxy. The idea was bold: to apply the knowledge gleaned at Aquaron 7 to other frontier worlds, safeguarding oceanic life wherever it might be threatened. Applause followed, but beneath the celebration lay a deeper current of hope. In the crowd, Ethan caught Rena's gaze. Surrounded by the applause of colleagues and the swirl of life outside the dome, he saw in her eyes the spark of a shared future, a horizon yet unwritten, shaped by curiosity, courage, and compassion. The station's journey would continue, shaped by the synergy of human warmth and Nalphi wisdom. When the last of the formalities ended, they slipped away together, strolling the corridor that encircled the dome. Flashes of bioluminescent creatures illuminated their path, dancing like new stars against the ocean's endless night. Neither spoke. Words would have felt unnecessary, perhaps even too small to contain the breadth of emotion they shared. At length, they paused by a window that curved outward, granting an expansive view of the deep. Rena leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, the gentle press of her presence dispelling the notion of distance or doubt. Here, in the silent theater of underwater twilight, they found a sense of belonging far greater than any single world could offer. Together, they watched the silver-blue shadows drift across the reef, the station's lights casting long beams into the mysterious gloom. Each shift of the current was a reminder that life flowed ever onward, carrying with it the seeds of change and the promise of renewal. And in that moment, two beings from distant origins, hearts beating in unspoken harmony, they discovered a truth as vast as the ocean itself, that across the boundaries of species. Beneath the weight of impossible odds, humanity and compassion could still find a way to thrive, lighting even the darkest depths with an enduring glow of hope. And so, their story continued, bound by the warm currents of unity and guided by the shared dream of a world beneath the sea where kindness, perseverance, and love might forever flourish.